There comes a moment in every emotionally unavailable relationship when silence screams louder than words, and the person you love suddenly feels like a stranger. But listen to me closely. How you respond in that moment doesn't just define your relationship. It defines you. Take a deep breath. Because what I'm about to share with you, it's not just advice. It's a transformation. This is how secure people turn emotional distance into emotional connection. So if you're tired of chasing, tired of being confused, and tired of feeling like love always slips through your fingers, you're in the right room. When a dismissive avoidant pulls away, most people feel like their world just tilted off its axis. One moment, everything felt connected, intimate even, and the next, it's like a switch flipped. Their texts slow down, their tone changes. The warmth you felt just days ago suddenly vanishes, and you're left staring at your phone, questioning your worth, replaying every word you said, wondering if you did something wrong. The panic creeps in slowly, then all at once. But here's the truth that emotionally secure people know in their bones. The moment the avoidant pulls back is not the moment to react. It's the moment to pause. Most people go into fight or flight. They fight by sending that long paragraph, pouring their heart out, hoping it will fix whatever went wrong, or they flee, ghost them right back, slam the emotional door shut and call it protection. But both reactions come from the same place: fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of being too much or not enough. But secure people don't let fear run the show. They feel the fear, yes, but they don't become it. They pause. They don't rush to fix the discomfort. They don't chase answers from someone who is emotionally unavailable to give them. They step back, not to punish the other person, but to protect their peace. They say, let me sit with this, let me get clear, let me remember who I am, because when you're secure, you understand this core truth. Not everything that feels urgent deserves an urgent response. Sometimes silence isn't abandonment, it's information. Sometimes distance doesn't mean they're leaving you. It means they're confronting something inside themselves that has nothing to do with you. The pause is powerful. It gives you time to reflect rather than react. It gives you the emotional space to ask better questions. Is this really about me, or is this about their fear of intimacy? Instead of spiraling into self-doubt, you root yourself in self-awareness. You ground into your values, you reconnect with your center. Secure people don't try to rescue someone who isn't asking to be saved. They don't make the pull back a personal attack. They use it as a mirror, to check in, not check out. And from that calm, clear place, they lead with strength, not survival. When someone with a dismissive avoidant attachment style pulls away, it can trigger a powerful emotional reaction, especially in someone who craves closeness and emotional connection. You feel the void instantly. The warmth is gone, the energy shifts, and the temptation is strong to close that gap at any cost. Most people immediately abandon themselves in an effort to not lose the other person. They bend, they shrink, they silence their own needs just to keep the relationship intact. But that path only leads to one place: emotional emptiness. Secure people do something radically different. They hold space for the other person, yes, but more importantly, they hold space for themselves. They don't confuse self-sacrifice with love. They don't silence their feelings just to maintain connection. They stay connected to who they are, even in the face of distance. And that's the difference between codependency and emotional maturity. See, it's easy to think you're being understanding by giving someone space. But if you're giving space while secretly hoping they come back just so you can feel safe again, you've already abandoned yourself. True space doesn't mean waiting by the door. It means turning inward. It means asking yourself, what am I feeling right now, instead of what are they thinking? It means giving your emotions a seat at the table without letting them drive the whole show. When the avoidant withdraws, secure people use that moment as a checkpoint. They scan their own internal state. They recognize the impulse to overfunction, to chase, to prove, and instead of giving in, they lean into self-respect. They say to themselves, I can want connection without betraying my own emotional reality. They don't text just to fill the silence. They don't agree to things that don't feel good just to win approval. They don't perform worthiness. They own it. They allow the space to exist without collapsing their identity into the fear of abandonment. This is what it looks like to be emotionally sovereign. You don't need the other person to validate your emotions before you believe they're real. You don't outsource your emotional regulation to someone who's already overwhelmed by their own. You learn to stay grounded, to stay present, and most importantly, to stay loyal to yourself. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've stopped confusing care with self-erasure. It means your love includes you too. When a dismissive avoidant starts pulling away, most people go into internal chaos. They start obsessively overanalyzing every detail. What they said, how they looked, whether they were too needy or too cold. Their mind spins with a single, tormenting question. What did I do wrong? But that question is a trap. Because what secure people understand, and what can take years to learn, is this: the pull back isn't about you. When someone with a dismissive avoidant pattern distances themselves, they're not necessarily reacting to you, your value, or your behavior. They're responding to something inside themselves, something unresolved, something fearful, something that tells them closeness equals danger, vulnerability equals weakness, and being seen equals being trapped. Dismissive avoidants don't withdraw because they don't like you. Often, they withdraw because they do. That emotional intensity, the connection, the closeness, it triggers a fear response. The same love you're reaching for feels threatening to their nervous system. And so they do what they've always done when overwhelmed. They create distance. They emotionally freeze. They disconnect as a way to feel safe. Secure people don't take this personally. They don't turn someone else's emotional avoidance into their own emotional injury. They don't spiral into unworthiness just because someone else hasn't learned how to stay. Instead, they remember a crucial truth. This isn't about me. It's about what closeness brings up in them. That's not an excuse. It's an understanding, and that understanding creates power, because the moment you stop blaming yourself for someone else's withdrawal, you take your power back. You shift from self-criticism to self-compassion. You stop trying to decode their silence and start listening to your own voice. You stop chasing explanations and start honoring your own clarity. Emotionally secure people know they are not responsible for healing someone else's fear of intimacy. They can offer safety, but they will not prove themselves endlessly. They can hold space, but they won't erase themselves to earn love, because they understand that someone else's discomfort with connection isn't a reflection of their worth. It's a reflection of the other person's unhealed story. And from that place of inner security, they no longer react to the pull back with panic. They respond with presence. They hold compassion without collapsing. They observe the behavior without internalizing the meaning. Because they've learned the truth, the way someone protects themselves from intimacy has nothing to do with your capacity to love. When a dismissive avoidant pulls away, the emotional instinct for many is to fight for connection, but not in a healthy way. Instead, it becomes a subtle battle, a war of texts, timing, tone, and control. You may find yourself sending vague, passive-aggressive messages like, "I guess you're busy," or "It's fine, I didn't expect a reply." You start watching their online activity like it's evidence in a courtroom, measuring your next move based on theirs. You try to win them back not through vulnerability, but through strategy. But secure people refuse to engage in emotional warfare. They don't use silence as a weapon. They don't use words to guilt, shame, or manipulate. They don't bait the avoidant with jealousy or subtle jabs, because they know something essential. Manipulation may get a reaction, but it will never create real connection. Avoidants often trigger these power struggles without realizing it. Their withdrawal sends a message, intentional or not, that says you're too close. And when someone feels rejected, it's easy to shift into control mode. You try to make them feel what you're feeling. You want them to notice the pain their distance causes. So you send a cold text, or you pull back harder, hoping they'll chase you in return. But this only deepens the cycle. The avoidant feels more overwhelmed, more misunderstood, more emotionally cornered, and they retreat even further. Secure people recognize this pattern for what it is, a trauma loop. a cycle where fear meets fear and nobody wins. So instead of reacting, they respond with truth. They choose radical honesty over reactive games. They may say, "I've noticed some distance, and I want to check in," not to blame, but to understand. They create a space where connection isn't forced, but invited. This doesn't mean they're naive or overly accommodating. It means they're emotionally intelligent. They understand that if they stoop to manipulation, they've already lost the part of themselves they were trying to protect. They lead with maturity, not tactics. They express themselves clearly, kindly, and without expectation of control. Secure people don't need to win the emotional upper hand. They're not playing that game. Because for them, the goal isn't power, it's peace. It's alignment. It's showing up with authenticity, even when the other person disappears behind emotional armor. And that authenticity, over time, is what disrupts the old cycle and makes space for something deeper than performance, real emotional connection. When a dismissive avoidant starts to withdraw, it often activates a deep need in others to close the gap quickly. And in that desperation to restore the connection, many people begin to blur their boundaries. They start saying yes when they mean no. They accept inconsistencies they would never tolerate in any other context. They excuse emotional neglect as just how they are. This is how self-abandonment begins, quietly, subtly, one compromised standard at a time. But emotionally secure people operate differently. They know that love without boundaries isn't love, it's self-erasure. And they don't confuse setting a boundary with building a wall. Boundaries are not about pushing someone away. They're about honoring where you end and someone else begins. They don't serve as a punishment. They serve as protection. Protection of peace, of values, of emotional well-being. When the avoidant pulls back, a secure person doesn't chase, but they also don't silently suffer. They don't sit in confusion and call it patience. They speak up, not from anxiety but from alignment. They might say, "I care about you, but I also care about how I feel in this connection. If consistent communication isn't possible, I need to step back to protect my own emotional safety." That isn't drama. That's clarity, that's strength, and make no mistake, this clarity can be uncomfortable. Avoidants are often used to ambiguity. They expect people to either chase or disappear, but rarely to stand tall in their truth. So when a secure person calmly but firmly expresses a boundary, it disrupts the pattern. It says, "I'm not here to play roles. I'm here to connect authentically, and if you can't meet me there, I'll love myself enough to walk away." Boundaries are not ultimatums. They are expressions of self-respect. They say, "This is what's okay for me, this is what's not, and this is what I will do if those lines are crossed." No blame, no emotional explosions, just grounded, unapologetic honesty. Secure people know that if you have to abandon yourself to be loved, it's not love, it's survival. So they choose self-loyalty over temporary closeness. They hold the door open for connection, yes, but they also hold it open for themselves to leave if the relationship becomes a place of confusion, anxiety, or repeated emotional shutdown. This is what makes boundaries powerful. Not because they control others, but because they protect your ability to stay true to who you are, even in the face of distance, silence, or emotional fear. When a dismissive avoidant creates distance, most people instinctively try to fill the space immediately. They reach out again and again, trying to pull the other person back into closeness. They assume that if they just explain enough, love harder, or stay constantly available, the avoidant will feel safe enough to return. But what they don't realize is that this constant availability often removes the very thing that might wake the avoidant up to what they're pushing away, the experience of absence. Secure people do something radically different. They allow space. They don't rush to fix the distance. They don't send a string of messages just to feel less anxious. They don't try to guilt or pressure the avoidant into engaging. Instead, they stay calm, grounded, and quietly absent. This isn't passive aggression, it's presence with boundaries, it's knowing when to lean in and when to lean back. Avoidants are often stuck in survival patterns. They're afraid of closeness because it threatens their sense of control. But here's the paradox. When they feel someone is always there, no matter how distant or avoidant they become, they never have to feel the impact of their behavior. They never have to confront what they're actually afraid of losing. There's no contrast, only comfort in the illusion that emotional distance carries no real consequence. Secure people break that illusion not by punishing the avoidant, but by removing the emotional safety net. They let the avoidant feel the weight of their own emotional decisions. They create a space where the avoidant must sit in the silence they created, and possibly realize that something valuable is missing. In that quiet, something powerful happens. The avoidant has room to reflect. They might begin to feel the edges of loneliness, the discomfort of disconnection, or even the regret of their habitual escape. This reflection rarely happens in the chaos of pursuit. It happens in the stillness of someone's absence. Secure people understand this. They trust that the right people will notice the silence, not because it was loud, but because it was real. They don't force someone to care. They don't campaign for attention. They simply step back and let reality speak, and in doing so, they give the avoidant the opportunity to choose connection, not because they're being chased, but because they finally realize what they're missing. There's a pivotal shift that happens when someone moves from anxious reactivity to emotional security, and it's this. They stop trying to prove their worth in relationships and start living from it. When a dismissive avoidant pulls away, most people go into overdrive, trying to become more likable, more agreeable, more low maintenance. They think if they just become easier to love, the avoidant will finally stay. But in doing so, they make a painful trade. They give up parts of themselves just to be chosen by someone who's afraid of closeness. Secure people don't play that game. They don't chase approval. They don't mold themselves into the perfect partner just to keep someone who keeps running. Instead, they root into their identity. They remember their values. They ask themselves not, how do I make them stay? But does this relationship align with the kind of love I'm willing to participate in? That single shift changes everything. Because when you're grounded in your own worth, you stop reacting to someone else's emotional inconsistency like it's a measure of your value. You don't interpret silence as punishment. You don't turn distance into a sign that you're unlovable. You recognize what's yours and what's theirs. You stop leaking energy trying to manage someone else's emotional limitations and instead focus on maintaining your emotional integrity. Secure people know that love should never feel like a performance. It should never feel like a series of emotional auditions, hoping to finally get a role in someone's life. Instead, love should feel like mutual recognition. I see you, and I feel safe being seen by you. If that mutuality is missing, secure people don't cling tighter. They step back and reevaluate. They know their value is not up for negotiation. It doesn't rise and fall based on who stays or who leaves. It's stable, it's consistent, it's rooted in self-awareness and self-respect. And from that place of grounded worth, they can love without losing themselves. That's what makes their presence powerful. They don't need someone to validate their existence. They choose to connect. And if that connection becomes toxic, unclear, or emotionally unsafe, they don't collapse. They don't panic. They walk away, not because they stopped caring, but because they started caring more about their own emotional peace. This is what emotional security looks like in real life. It's not about never hurting. It's about knowing you'll never betray yourself just to keep someone close. So much of what we call love is actually fear in disguise, fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough, fear that if we don't chase, don't fix, don't shrink ourselves to fit someone else's emotional limits, we'll be left behind. But here's the truth that secure people live by. Real love doesn't require self-abandonment. It doesn't demand that you betray your values, your voice, or your emotional truth just to be chosen. When a dismissive avoidant pulls away, the old version of you might have felt rejected, but the healed version of you, the secure version, sees that moment as a mirror, a chance to pause, to protect your peace, to remember that your worth is not determined by someone else's capacity to stay. In every relationship, there comes a defining moment, the moment you choose whether to react from your wounds or respond from your wholeness. Secure people don't need to prove anything. They don't chase to soothe anxiety, and they don't fight for attention that's been withheld. They stand in their truth with clarity, calm, and compassion. They recognize that boundaries are not threats. They are invitations to real connection. They understand that sometimes silence is more powerful than pleading, and presence is more powerful than pressure. And most of all, they know that emotional maturity is not about fixing someone who's unavailable. It's about refusing to disappear inside someone else's avoidance. The most powerful transformation happens when you stop seeing the avoidance withdrawal as a reflection of your inadequacy and start seeing it as a test of your emotional alignment. Will you contort yourself to maintain closeness, or will you hold your center even as they create distance? Will you shrink to fit into their comfort zone, or will you expand into your full, authentic self, regardless of whether they join you there? Secure people don't fear the answer to those questions, because they know that connection that costs you your self-respect is far too expensive to keep. And connection that honors your truth never has to be forced. So if you find yourself in that familiar moment, the silence, the distance, the sudden coldness, don't beg for breadcrumbs. Don't chase someone who runs from their own heart. Instead, turn inward, rise into your strength, anchor into your truth. Let your grounded presence be the message. I don't need you to choose me for me to know my worth. Because once you embody that truth, everything changes. You stop chasing love, and you start attracting alignment, safety, and the kind of connection that doesn't just survive the storm. It transforms because of it. If this message stirred something in you, it wasn't by accident. You're not alone in what you feel, and you deserve the kind of love that sees you, hears you, and stays. Drop a comment if this resonated. I read every word. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more healing to more hearts. Tap the bell icon so you never miss a moment of truth and transformation. Until next time, stay grounded, stay secure, and never forget, your heart is worthy of real connection. Goodbye for now.